name is Thottan, and I work as the chief curator at a digital storytelling platform. My work hours include reading stories from writers around the world. Yes, school job. My after work hours include writing stories of my own and having conversations with the characters inside my head. Or as my mom simply puts it, I talk to myself. I love words, and I love what words can do. But since I don't have a fancy presentation in which the starting letter of 5 of my points come together to form a word, I'm going to try and talk to you in the best way I can. When I was asked to give my first TED talk, I was quite clueless what to talk about. And so I went back to all the main moments in my life, all the first experiences I've had, to see if there was some inspiration I could draw from them. And so I sat down beside this projector in my head and pulled out 4 memory reels I could find. And I hit play. Now, I went to an all-boys school. Yeah, that's funny itself, yeah. And back when I was in 3rd grade, I got a chance to be a part of my first school play. You know, one of those where you'll either be a character who will have dialogues on stage or a tree. Now, my play had all the fairy tale characters in them. From Snow White to Goldilocks to Red Riding Hood, and of course, trees. But by the time I auditioned, there were just 3 parts remaining. Hansel, Gretel, and tree number 2. Now I got through, okay? But they felt I was not good enough to play Hansel. They also felt I was not good enough to play tree number 2. And so I was quite happy being Gretel. But my mom was the happiest. In fact, she was so happy seeing me in that wig with long hair and that bright blue dress that she took me to a local photo studio. You know, one of those where their backgrounds are either a red curtain or a photoshopped flower garden with the word Mahabaleshwar on them. And she got a full-length photograph of me clicked. And I remember the words of the photographer, a man in his 50s, who pointed towards me and told my mother in Hindi, "Aapki beti bahut achhi dikh rahi hai." Yeah, thank you for laughing at that and not at my tortoise joke. But only years later, when I found this photograph again, did I realize that I wasn't embarrassed when this had happened. Because back when we were kids, being embarrassed meant sitting upset for a day and moving on. Now it means wondering what everyone else is going to say about me. And so sometimes you and I are too scared of trying new things for the first time. But I don't blame us. After all, we have public images to maintain, social feeds we don't want to mess up, biases in our heads with half the knowledge, and scary first experiences we've heard or read from someone. And so sometimes we don't even get to the point of trying new things for the first time, because we're too busy worrying about the worst that could happen if we did. Now, as the years turned and I went to college, I learned a very important lesson that I wish more textbooks taught us. How to be okay if people don't like you. Now, I thought everyone liked me. I mean, how could they not? I was always helpful in projects. I was nice to the people I talked to, and I even shared my lunch. Okay, maybe not the last part, but still. After 2 semesters, when I realized that I was being left out of certain things, I felt maybe I'm not liked enough. I had these stories in my head that I wanted to make into films, but no one wanted to make them with me. I heard whispers around of some people saying my stories are bad. Some people said that I was difficult to work with, and some didn't like having me around. To top all of that, I had no filmmaking training, no camera, and few friends. And so I did the best thing I could do in that kind of a situation, you know. I made a list of ways I could get people to like me. But the list was getting longer, and the stories were piling up. And I was growing impatient. And so I just began looking for people who would sit down and hear what I had to say. And if they liked it, say it with me to the world. And just like that, on a summer afternoon, sitting in a cafe with 3 other friends, I co-founded my first YouTube channel. Now, if you're a creator, any one of you here, you get it when I say that you're the most nervous when you're about to hit that publish button to put out for the world to see what you've just made. Agree? And me, I'd written the script, directed, and acted in my first film. My hands were shivering. Almost to the point where I was wondering, is this a good idea at all? I mean, what if I started getting film offers after this? Yeah, how would I manage college life and stardom? But jokes aside, we crossed 1,000 views in a month. I climbed 1,000 clouds in my head. Even though I knew it was mostly just my friends and family who kept refreshing the page till we got to that number. But we enjoyed what we'd done. I'd made my first film, and I was happy. So by second film, we were shooting secretly at a railway station, hoping not to be caught by the cops. By our third, websites like Spoopoo for making us go viral all over the internet. And by our fourth, we landed our first ever international short film deal. Funny part, we don't make films anymore. Mostly because we're just busy doing other things. But I finally found a word that summed up exactly how I felt back then. FOMO, the fear of missing out. Now, adulthood is a great place to see it. We not wanting to miss out on anything that's relevant or trending. But college is where it all began. Whether it was the friends you wanted to hang out with, the parties you never got called to, the better internship your friend got, or that crush you never managed to talk to. For me, I didn't want to have missed out on making my first film and sat back years later wondering, what if I had? And right now, if you're delaying on trying something new for the first time, I'm not going to be cool and give you a fancy reason on why you should. You just need to ask yourself, is it really worth missing out on? Did I tell you I like planning things? No, I love planning things. And so last year, I saved up, planned, and took my first solo trip to this beautiful state called Meghalaya. Oh, and it was also my first flight. And since I was so nervous about taking my first flight, I actually memorized all the steps. Let me list them out for you in case you don't know, or in case you do. Show your ID proof, check in your luggage, collect your boarding pass, go through security, and the most important rule according to every mom, get onto the right plane. Now I always stood in the arrival section wondering what must it feel like to depart. So when I was finally up there with my head in the clouds, I let myself cry my heart out. I'd made an itinerary for my itinerary, telling me what I'm supposed to do at what time of the day. But only once the trip actually began did I realize how happy I was nothing was going according to plan. Because if it had, I would have never walked through a hailstorm with a haversack on my back, or slept alone in a dormitory with no electricity and rain pouring out so loud it almost felt like thunder. I would have never seen mist rise up from behind the mountains, moving in and sucking in everything in its path. Or climbed down and back up 3,700 steps, wondering if I did this again, could I beat my current time? I would have never known I'm afraid of boats. And most importantly, I would have never made new friends. Now, I'm not saying planning is bad, it's important. But planning for me became like my comfort zone. And only once had I left this comfort zone, did I realize what routine I was breaking. Because I feel comfort zones and routines sort of go hand in hand. So if you can, on some days, get up, open the door, and leave that comfort zone. Try something you haven't yet. Whether it's a skill, a hobby, an instrument, or that startup idea that's now just a presentation lying in some folder, try it. Maybe you'll feel a little different because you're trying something new, but you'll be surprised as to how much you really needed it. And well, if you liked it when it happened for the first time, you could always go back for seconds. Now I can't take solo trips every month. #work life. And so I try leaving my comfort zones through the stories I write, seeing how far I can stretch my imagination. I have a small community of readers that I talk to, and they love talking back through their personal messages and comments. They're very supportive and encouraging. And I think it feels amazing when someone actually messages you and tells you that you inspired them to write. But the biggest moment for me happened a couple of years back when I stopped writing. When I was 19, I had to go through the first death of my family. Now, I've been raised by a single mother, and so when the news of my father, who I hadn't seen for years, arrived, I didn't know exactly how to react. I sat there consoling everyone, but I couldn't cry. It took me 3 years to finally be able to write about it. And I remember once I got a message from a 17-year-old boy who told me that his parents were going through a divorce, that he couldn't tell this to anyone because he felt no one would understand him, and that he was scared of telling his teachers because he was afraid the entire staff room would know. And for whatever it was worth, my poem had made him feel better. And right there, in that moment, I felt maybe I haven't gone through this phase alone, that I have shared that first experience with him and many others unknowingly. Because that's, I guess, how loss is, right? It's one of those first experiences that you're never really prepared for. And I know it sounds really cliche when I say this, but there are some firsts that you're not seeking, but they will end up finding you. And when they do, you're just going to have to deal with them, taking your time in the best way you can. For the last few minutes that we have together, I'm just going to request you to help me out here in introducing the last part of my talk. I'm going to list out a few first experiences, and if you've been through them, I just want you to raise your hand, okay? I won't make you guys keep it up for longer, okay? Promise. If you remember your first email address and it was very embarrassing, just keep them raised, okay? Keep them raised. If you remember the first time you stepped out into the world with your first job or your first internship, okay? If you remember what you did with your first paycheck. If you remember the first time you held someone's hand because you were in love. Lots of people. And lastly, if you remember the first time you actually lost someone, I want you to take a good hard look around. Okay, and how many people's hands are raised? You can keep them down now. Each one of you sitting here has shared a first experience. And I feel that there's just one way through which we can all learn and know about it, right? And if you haven't guessed how it is yet, here's a little poem I wrote. It's called First Timers. I miss first conversations because I think there's just something about them. I think it's the tone of the voice or the careful picking of words, the thrill of disclosing a secret, and vulnerable questions with no made-up answers. I've been wanting to say this since a long time. There's also I've been feeling the exact same. There's getting to know and gaining interest. There are icebreakers and funny replies. I've heard stories that should become books. I've heard stories that have taught me plenty. I've told a few of my own, and in turn, taken many back home. Write, erase, write, send. Think, don't say it without thinking. But the years have turned, and I guess I've changed. I crave people, but I know they'll leave. But the best conversations I've had have all been firsts. My worst ones, on the other hand, were all lasts. Thank you.